Welcome to Decision Point. Texas Senate House Bill 2 further restricts abortion, and that was passed recently by the Texas Senate. So what does all of this mean to us as Texans and possibly throughout the United States when it comes to abortion rights? Well, Richard Munsinger, who's an attorney with Scott Hulls, is here to talk with us about it. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you again. So what is the Senate Bill 2 anyway, or House Bill 2?
It's an amendment of several Texas statutes relating to abortion. In essence, it says that after 20 weeks of abortion, there are certain very serious restrictions, and in fact, the only time that an abortion can be performed after 20 weeks of fetal age is one, to save the life of the mother, or to prevent serious bodily harm to her, and the statute is quite specific about those circumstances. It also requires that abortionists have active medical staff privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of the abortion place that they work at. It also forbids, or regulates, doesn't forbid, but it regulates RU 486, the abortion drug dispensing and use, and what doctors have to do in prescribing and giving that drug.
Okay. Is the essential effect of this to dramatically limit abortions in the state of Texas? What do you think the motivation was behind this bill?
Well, I think the motivation is clear. It's to protect the fetus. Under federal law, since Roe versus Wade, prior to viability, a woman has essentially an absolute right to an abortion. Viability means that the fetus can live outside the woman's body on its own. It can have ventilators and what have you, but it can survive outside of the woman's body. The last time I looked, which was in the last few days, 23 to 24 weeks of gestational age is the viability line. So this statute prohibiting abortions for fetuses 20 weeks and older certainly will cut down on the number of abortions if it survives federal analysis. And I think that the legislature in passing it points to the fact that a fetus can feel pain after 20 weeks. And so this was a law designed to protect the fetus from pain and from essentially dismemberment, because that's what abortion does. It just tears the baby apart, and after 20 weeks the baby feels it. So this was the state of Texas' effort to regulate and promote the health of a fetus in the mother from 20 weeks on. And that is a valid state purpose. The law of abortion in the United States is summarized in a case called Casey, and in essence it says that a state may not stop a woman from getting an abortion up to the time of fetal viability, and may not put undue regulations on it after that up to viability, but that the state has a true interest in protecting fetal health. And so this is the Texas legislature's attempt at protecting fetal health. It's my understanding that there are 6 or 7 other states that have passed laws that are essentially identical to it.
And so this is a reflection of biology and research, as well as the will of the people of Texas, would you say, or how?
Well,
how
a majority of the House of Representatives and of the Senate voted for it. They are the elected representatives of the people. So yes, a majority of the people acting through their legislators have voted to enact this law. And assuming, I'm not a doctor, but I assume that the legislature in fact is correct when it says that it's medically known that a fetus of 20 weeks can feel pain. I've seen demonstrations of them reacting to touches and what have you, which suggests that they do have sense organs in their body and can feel pain. And the fact that you can't see them or hear them when they're dismembered doesn't mean they don't feel pain.
Yeah, right. Well, a lot of people who are on the abortion rights end of things, in other words, pro-abortion, would say that that you're putting the needs of this fetus before the needs and rights of the mother and the person who's carrying the baby. So why would that not stand in a court of law, that you got these two competing rights issues going on?
That's exactly what the legislature is betting on, that the courts are going to recognize that you have to weigh the value of a woman's right to have an abortion, which the courts created. The people never voted for it, in Texas at least. There were states that did. New York had it. I think California may have had an abortion law. Nevada may have. Some others had abortion laws. Texas never did. But the people didn't vote for abortion, and so the court's going to have to determine whether or not attempting to prevent pain to a fetus outweighs from 20 weeks on a woman's so-called right to an abortion.
Mm-hmm. And so again, what kind of an effect does this have on women who want to have an abortion beyond 20 weeks in Texas?
Well, the law won't go into effect for 91 days following the end of this special session. I'm not sure when that end was officially, but 2/3 of the Senate didn't vote for it, so therefore it cannot go into effect until 91 days later. I am sure before that there will be lawsuits filed to enjoin the enforcement of the law, so that until the courts resolve the question of whether it is constitutional under the federal Constitution, it's not going to have an effect on anybody. But in time, presumptively, the United States Supreme Court will have to address the legality of this law and the comparable laws of other states.
Mm-hmm. So you're pretty sure this will go to the Supreme Court?
Well, I don't think there's any question. Whether it'll go to the Supreme Court, I don't know. It certainly will go to court, and whether the Supreme Court takes it or not, I don't know. Texas will seek to preserve its law and will try and get into the Supreme Court. I'd be stunned if it doesn't get there.
Now, what we're seeing both in this case as well as in the striking down the Defense of Marriage Act is that there's now become this war between the federal government by the Supreme Court and states' rights, kind of determine, that it used to be clear what the states' rights were. Now it seems like there's a lot of federal laws, like, for example, the right to have an abortion wasn't voted on by Texas, but yet now Texas has been providing abortions. So are we seeing more and more encroachment here where federal law trumps state law and states' rights? Or?
Yes, the federal Constitution, of course, applies to all the citizens within the United States. And it's just a question of what the court, when 5 people on the Supreme Court say this is the law, it's the law, whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. That's been true since Roe versus Wade in 1973, clearly. Mm-hmm. Same way with the definition of pornography, for example. Mm-hmm. The Supreme Court overturned the law of many states regarding the definition of pornography. So,
which was what?
Well,
you remember?
I don't.
Yeah.
I was back in the 50s. I remember being in high school when that happened, and
right.
I look back at it in my own mind as being one of the watershed events, because it's, in my opinion, Western civilization and America in particular are on the downhill slide, and it's basically moral. Abortion addresses the humanity of a fetus. If we can kill anybody for whatever reason that we want before they're born and because they're helpless, why does that not apply elsewhere? What is it that stands in the way between killing someone with dementia, killing someone with a bad case of Down syndrome or something else? We have stood Western civilization on its head, and we've stood Christianity on its head. I've done a little bit of reading this area. The only societies that opposed abortion in classic civilization were the Jews and the Spartans. The Spartans, because it was a matter of philosophy, you took what you got. Whatever came to you, you took it, lumped it, and went on with it. And the Jews, because God created life, and you're not supposed to commit abortion. That's the classic teaching of Judaism. It's only in the last couple of hundred years or whatever it is, 50 years, 75 years, that anybody even questions that. Mm-hmm. So you're standing, Western civilization is based on Christianity and based on Judaism, and I think based on capitalism. You're standing this on its head when you say you can kill a baby.
Yeah, right.
The Romans allowed abortion. They allowed exposure. Under Roman law, a woman and a family had X number of days to accept or not accept a child. I don't remember what it was a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever. And if they didn't want the child and they hadn't aborted it, they could just throw it away.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
Oh, yes, they did.
So
and
that
that
happened
was,
way back in Rome, huh?
and the Christians went around picking the babies up and saving them.
Oh, wow.
And they
That's
were
like,
laughed at for it.
And that's how it is in China with the one-child law.
Well,
right?
and so that's why we ought to be able to vote on these things.
Right.
Do we want a society that demeans life in such a way? Certainly, I mean, I pray at the abortion clinics from time to time. Used to do it a lot more than I have lately, but I see the young people going in there and getting abortions, and my heart goes out to them. Nobody wants to be pregnant and not be married, and I understand that. At the same time, the child is innocent, and the child is conceived with God's permission. Got people that are desperate to have children, they can't. Here's somebody that God has permitted to be created. If God, as Christianity teaches, is love, love has created a being. And our law says that the mother can kill this being that God, love, says exists at my desire and my will. I think we're spitting in God's face when we do that. And once again, as a Catholic, I think it's a scandal that you look at the Catholic office holders in the legislature and locally who are fighting for abortion. They're fighting for abortion, and they claim to be Catholics.
Yeah.
It's stunning.
Yeah.
It's stunning.
Yeah. Right. Well, it is certainly inconsistent. One wonders how much their faith informs their actions.
I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, except if you're going to be in politics in El Paso, at least you better be a Democrat.
Yeah. Right.
And if you're going to be a Democrat, then you got to toe the Democrat line. It's the only thing that unifies the Democratic Party is abortion.
Really?
Well, what else does?
Yeah.
What else does?
I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that. Yeah.
I mean, it's a shame. It's a great shame, and I'm just stunned at these Catholics that stand up and trumpet their Catholicism, their office holders, trumpet their Catholicism or their claimed Catholicism and support the murder of a defenseless child. It's unbelievable.
Well, I think more and more politicians of all persuasions are saying what's politically expedient rather than speaking according to their convictions. And I think, again, research that's been done on the issue of abortion, people are saying, well, maybe I personally wouldn't have an abortion, but it's not my right to tell you that you can't have an abortion. And so I think people have lost that sense of me being my brother's keeper, so to speak, or me being responsible for overall how society goes. I don't think people understand that what I do and what I permit then affects the bigger issue.
Well, I'm Christian. I have a vote. My vote allows me to try and build the society that I, as a Christian, want. What is it that takes my Christianity and says that is not a valid consideration in creating a society? Why suddenly are Christians no longer able to speak Christian truth to the world? Why suddenly are Christian thoughts not allowed? I mean, our government, did you know that the Obama administration refers not to freedom of religion but freedom of worship, and they did so in briefs that they filed in the Supreme Court of the United States? They want to keep religion out of the public square. And that's what the secular humanists want to do.
Right.
You can't tell me how to live. That's religious. Well, but you're a secular humanist. You're telling me how to live. That's anti-religious. What's the difference between the two? Our votes should count, and we Christians need to vote accordingly. You need to take a look and see who you're voting for and what they're doing with your society.
Do you think that what's the difference between freedom of worship and freedom of religion? How does that affect what the administration may be arguing for?
Freedom of worship, of course, is how I worship inside the doors of the building of my church. Freedom of religion lets me stand on the street corner and proselytize. Freedom of religion lets me operate a school. President Obama bemoaned Catholic schools in Ireland, for God's sakes. He said, isn't it a shame, and as I'm paraphrasing, we have Catholic schools and Protestant schools. We ought not to have that. We ought to have one set of schools. Did you hear that, Catholics? Did you hear that, Catholics? Did you hear that, Episcopalians and Anglicans, about St. Clement's School? somebody believes that we ought not to have religious schools. That's the difference between freedom of religion and freedom of worship. I can run a school and teach my children and others about God and about the Savior Jesus. I'm free to do that. But if I can only have the freedom of worship, I may not be able to have a school, and I may not be able to have a hospital, and I may not be able to have an adoption agency. Catholics have been run out of adoption agencies in some countries and some states because they refuse to allow homosexual adoption. That's infringing on my freedom of religion.
Yeah.
And nobody seems to care. All these wonderful Catholic office holders who stand here and promote this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Touting their religion. What wonderful Catholics they are, and yet they do these kinds of things, and they support political parties that do these kinds of things. It's again, it's stunning.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's also true on the abortion issue, isn't it? With the Catholic Church or religious organizations that don't support abortion or aren't willing to provide an abortion along with other services, they're being discriminated against or defunded or what have you, right?
It can be, and then you've got the problem of providing insurance. If you're a Catholic hospital, for example, and you have employees, it's against the Catholic teaching to provide funding for abortion. The government may say, and has said, you have to do it. You have to provide contraception, which is contrary to Catholic teaching. Do we have freedom of religion or don't we? And these people, there are a lot of these people who want, that's why I asked you if you were familiar with the magazine First Things, because it is a magazine that does address this question of religion in the public sphere. It's a very good magazine. It's probably 15 or 20 years old. It's a very good magazine, but the point is, people are trying to tell religious people, stay out of public affairs. And the courts are adopting this attitude. A major political party is adopting this attitude. When its president bemoans the fact that there are Catholic schools in Ireland, for God's sakes, that's astounding.
Yeah.
You don't hear much about that.
No, but
it is astounding that the President of the United States would say, in essence, we ought not to have Catholic schools.
Yeah. Well, it is, I think, a portent of the direction of things, because I don't think a lot of people realize that there are all kinds of people who believe that you can have your point of view, your religious point of view, just don't impose it upon me, don't codify it in laws. And and I don't think they understand that once you stop that forward movement and promoting that freedom of expression, then you begin to move backwards and it becomes a tyranny against people of faith, right?
Clearly.
Yeah.
Clearly.
And so what might that tyranny look like in terms of being able to express
well, I think
religion?
you're seeing it in Sweden, and you see it in England and Canada right now. You can't. You may have seen it on television the other day where the American street preacher was arrested in England for preaching against homosexuality. You can't preach against that. You can't preach against homosexuality. The Canadians won't let you say bad things about Allah, or not Allah, but about Islam and the Prophet. You go before civil rights boards and what have you. So I think what it leads to is squelching Christian speech, Christian conduct. Let's face it, Christianity, if it's honored, is pretty rigorous and pretty demanding, and has some very remarkable views that are contrary to the current stream of consciousness and the current attitudes.
So what we're seeing in other countries, for example, which would be limiting your freedom of speech in England and in Canada, is what could potentially be down the road for America, the direction that we're heading. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I think. Yes, I do think that, big time. And it only takes people on the Supreme Court to change what we understand to be free speech. Right now, we have freedom of speech. I can stand on a street corner right now and say something critical of Mohammed.
But you can't make a movie about it. Right?
You can, but you can get in real trouble for doing
yeah,
so.
Right.
Well, the fellow, that fellow that's still in jail for having made that movie, I'm told that he's in jail for something else other than having made the movie. Whether that's the case, I don't know.
Right.
But in this country, you ought to have freedom of speech, but we won't if we're not careful.
Yeah. it's definitely an issue that doesn't affect me here and now necessarily, but can come back to bite me later, or I would live in fear of that. So, for example, with this whole gathering of information that the NSA is doing, where they have every bit of information, every email and everything that's ever been sent. I mean, people say, well, if you don't do anything bad, then why is that such a bad thing?
Well,
I mean, is it a dangerous thing or not for every individual?
well, of course it is, and it's dangerous because the government will release what it wants to release to destroy the candidacy of someone that's not on their favored list, just like they did when Obama ran for the Senate in Illinois. They took the secret records of his opponent's divorce case and made them public, and the guy lost the election. Okay, what prevents them from doing the same thing if they're wiretapping the conversation of somebody who wants to run for office against somebody and they release it? It would be Richard Nixon was going to do the same thing, or could have done the same thing. It isn't just Obama and the liberals, but it's a very dangerous thing.
So it could also be in the case of individuals who might be seeking something, and not just people who are running for public office, but anybody can be slandered, or
if your private conversations are released, if they're put in the hands of somebody, this boy Snowden that took the NSA's secrets, if he can steal the NSA's secrets, why can't he tape my telephone conversation and release it if he wants to? Mm-hmm. Clearly he could. Right. It's very troubling, obviously. It's very troubling.
Yeah. Well, so getting back, kind of to the whole issue of abortion rights, and so how does that infiltrate throughout society? So you talked about standing Western civilization on its head. What does that mean? That seems like an awfully lofty concept. How do you relate abortion in that?
Go back to the Roman times when human life was cheap and you could kill your baby, whether it was by abortion or by exposure. Why has that not been the case in the West since the time of Christianity? Because of Christianity. And so when you say that the Christian concept that life comes, and Jewish concept that life comes from God and is valuable and may not be taken by anybody, innocent life may not be taken by anybody, and you throw that away, why, if it applies to the fetus that can be killed, can it not apply to the child in time who is born with a disability? Why can't you kill that child or expose it like the Romans did? If the only thing that differentiates society, Roman society, from Western European society and American society is the Judeo-Christian heritage, if you throw away the Judeo-Christian heritage, what's left? Mm-hmm. Trousered apes. Mm-hmm. Apes with pants on. It's not an original phrase to me. I forget who coined it. It may have been C.S. Lewis, may not have been, but trousered apes, that's what you have. Trousered apes, people that do whatever they want, but they have pants on. If I can kill that unborn or the newborn baby, why can't I kill the old person with dementia? We have assisted suicide. Do you think this is not related to abortion? Of course it is, because it views human life as disposable. And that's why John Paul called it the culture of death, and why Pope Benedict called it the culture of death. Look about you. You're living in the culture of death. And again, I am astounded at these Catholic politicians who promote the culture of death, claiming to be Catholics, and throwing away Western civilization and throwing away Jesus' love of the unborn, Jesus' love of every human creature, throwing it away as if it meant nothing.
Well, some people would say, or secular humanists would say, that we should throw away the Judeo-Christian heritage, that it's an option, but it should not be the foundation of the Constitution and decision making for this country. We've evolved beyond that. Is that the death knell for us, or what?
The founders said, and others say and know, that freedom depends upon a religious population. Every time you enact a law to forbid something, it's because people are doing something that is worthy of being forbidden, or at least the majority so believes. 50 or 60 years ago, there may have been sexual harassment in the workplace, but I suspect not to the level to where we have to have the laws that we have today. Why is that? Look at your culture. Look at your culture. You have pornography. You have casual sex as if it's a recreational endeavor instead of being something that is for husband and wife. All this collapse, I think, eventually will lead to the loss of freedom, because in my lifetime, we debated when I was in college whether socialism or capitalism was the preferred system. That was the big debate when I was in college in the 50s. History proved that capitalism was better. So I learned from that in order to be prosperous, you have to be free. What I think we're learning now is that to be free, you have to be moral. And when we aren't moral, and we as a society are not, I think we will lose our freedoms. And I think abortion was one of the beginning aspects of this, because it goes directly to the heart of God's view of man. Think of this. Jesus is God. He becomes man to die for a human being. What value must this human being have? What extraordinary value does a human being have that God would become a man and die for him? And yet we kill it. We kill it. And it's our law, and we make our law. And when you say, I didn't do this, the Supreme Court did, ask yourself, who did you vote for? Are you voting for people that want this? Yeah, you are, most of you. And you shouldn't.
Yeah.
So I think that's why abortion is at the heart of the collapse of what I consider to be, at least, the collapse of Western civilization, the collapse of this country, and I suspect my grandchildren will live in a far different and far less free and prosperous society than the one I'm living in.
Right. Well, those are definitely words to ponder. Thank you for sharing. Do you think that a woman's right to abort her child trumps the child's right to live? Should the Texas legislature have passed a bill like this? Tell us what you think on Facebook, Twitter, or our website. Thank you for watching.